Hello, everybody. I have a great pleasure to welcome you at our last panel today. And I will start with some thought that a few days ago a book was published in France described the immediate history of the war in Ukraine. And this book was entitled The Bear and the Fox. And this title widely reflects the position of Russia and of Ukraine before the war. Russia, which entered the war from a victorious position, Ukraine as a smaller and weaker opponent. And it turned out that the public, as well as the representatives of many political elites, were overestimated Russia and underestimated Ukraine. Which role in this tragic story can be entrusted to the Central Europe, especially in this narrowest Kunderian sense, which means Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia? I will talk about this with my guest, Tereza Novotná and Łukasz Lewkowicz. Due to some personal issues, Andrzej Sadecki, he's not with us today. He was supposed to talk about Hungary, and I think it's almost symbolic, which due to Hungary's policy towards the war in Ukraine, as we can say, the Hungary left Central Europe in some way. And please let me introduce briefly my guest. So Tereza, she holds a PhD in politics and European studies from Boston University. She is currently Senior Associated Research Fellow at EUROPEUM. She works also at the Free University of Berlin as a part of a research project on the role of European Union in the crisis in North Korea and North Asia. And Tereza wrote a book, How Germany Unfiled and the EU Enlargement, Negotiation with Accession through Transplantation and Adaptation. And I kindly invite you to consult the Tereza websites, where you can find a lot of her articles, and I assure you that it would be very interesting read. And Łukasz Lewkowicz, he is the senior analyst in our institute. He also works at the university in Lublin, the University of Maria Curie-Skłodowska. He also holds a PhD in political science, and he specialized in Slovakia and cross-border cooperation in Central Europe. He also published a book entitled Euro Regions and the Polish-Slovak Borders, Genesis and Function. So to jump in right to our discussion, we can start with some general thoughts that if we think about the Central Europe and how Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine changed the countries of the region, what challenge it posed to them, the first aspect to be mentioned is the approach to security. And this can be clearly seen as the example on the Czech Republic, where according to the research carried in January 2023 by STEM, Czech becomes less Eurosceptic and began to perceive the European Union as one of the guarantors of their security. In the countries of the Visegrad group and beyond, speaking on security has been also, spending on security has been also increased. And in the subject of the general security of the European Union, much is said about the role of Poland and also of role of the Romania. But I would like to ask you, Łukasz, how the war in Ukraine changed the approach to security in Slovakia. I mean security understand in the traditional way, the physical security, but also as well the cyber security.
Okay, so I would like to say something about traditional way of security. So we can say since the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, Slovakia has been in the vanguard of countries providing military assistance to Ukraine. This is directly related to the great involvement of the Slovak authorities in political, diplomatic, and humanitarian support for Kiev. And evidence of this was, for example, selling the S-300 air defense systems to Ukraine, or fighters which were sent to defend Ukrainian cities. At the same time, the Slovak authorities took a pragmatic approach to supporting Ukraine and have obtained or will soon obtain military equipment from Western countries, including Patriot or Sentinel systems or Leopard tanks from Germany. And we can say, since the beginning of the war, there has been a consensus among the most important political parties in Slovakia, also in government coalition and in opposition. But this is a problem with the biggest party in opposition nowadays, left-wing Smer SD. The Smer is a supporter of policy of neutrality, following the example of Viktor Orban's Hungary. This party wants to stop the transfer of military equipment to Ukraine. Party also doesn't want to more NATO troops in Slovak territory. And also we can see strong anti-Americanism of Smer politicians nowadays. The leader of this group, Robert Fico, he's a long-term former prime minister. He described, for example, decision of Prime Minister Heger about selling this MiG-29 fighters to Ukraine side, an act of open hostility against Russia with which Smer want nothing to do. So this is a problem because soon we will have a election in Slovakia in September, and Smer SD is a leader of surveys nowadays, so probably Smer will make next coalition, government coalition, but we will see, of course. And the second part of your question is about cyber security. This is a big problem in Slovakia, especially since 2014 and started conflict in Ukraine, because from this time we have a large number of alternative on conspiracy media spreading disinformation and pro-Russian propaganda, especially in internet, so websites, but also accounts in Facebook and other social media. And we can say Slovaks are considered the nation most influential to disinformation in Central Europe. And since 2022, also it was a problem with activity of Russia embassy in Bratislava. And in March 2022, many Russian diplomats spreading disinformation and spying activities, of course, expelled from Slovakia. Also, we had a problem with Slovak collaborating with, for example, GRU or other special services from Russia. And also at the beginning of the war, it was many problems with people who collaborate with GRU from media, from Slovak secret services, or from universities. At the beginning of the war, the Slovak authorities adopted new legal solution enabling the closure of such media, including the very popular in Slovakia portal Hlavné správy, and they closed it. But the law was only valid until the holidays last year, and these portals are now opening one more time under different names, for example. So they're still active. I think there is a lack of strategic policy in Slovakia to fight disinformation, and this is a problem combined with a very complicated political situation in Slovakia, because nowadays we have a technical government, so it's just technical government. He will be till the September. There's a problem with strategic decision in this near future. So maybe that's all.
We will be develop this issue of disinformation in Central Europe, especially in the case of Slovakia, during our panel. Yeah, thank you for your insights on this issue of security. And when we think about another challenge posed to the V4 countries by the war in Ukraine, it is the change of the balance of power. I mean, not only a special turn toward expanding a strengthening relation with the United States, which we can observe of the example of Poland, for example, but also a change in Central Europe countries, the V4 countries, with China and in some cases some other Asian countries. And I would like to ask you, Tereza, about how Russia full-scale aggression against Ukraine changed the relationship between the countries of V4 and China, and how it affects the dynamic of the region's relation with Asian countries. And if so there is some kind of new challenges to the Visegrad countries. And as I said, I would like to focus on the Visegrad group countries, but we have some more time, so maybe some more general reflection on the region of Central Europe. They are also welcome.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Agata, for the questions, and most of all for actually inviting me to this panel. It's great to be here at the Institute of Central Europe in Lublin. So it's my first time, not just at the Institute, but in this very nice city. So it's wonderful to be here, and I hope it's also a beginning of more cooperation between the institutions I am based at, both in Prague and Berlin, and perhaps Lublin. So thanks again. Maybe I'll start. I will follow up a little bit on Łukasz, because Slovakia for a long time has been sort of like a poster child of the Visegrad group doing everything right. And now, of course, we are hearing that it may not last that long. Czech Republic, on the other side of the Czechoslovak border, so to speak, was for quite a while a little bit, let's say, not the worst pupil in the group, but not so great. But since basically the late 2021, when the Czech Republic received a new government led by Prime Minister Petr Fiala, this has been shifting. So now we are always trying to say that the Czechs are, doing quite well within the V4. That led also to the fact that in early 2023, earlier this year, we also had presidential elections. And, well, first of all, the previous President Zeman, who was quite well known for his very close relations both with Moscow and Beijing, left office after 10 years, and we have a new president, Petr Pavel, who is not only very much supportive of Ukraine and, let's say, democracy in general, but he is also a former chief of staff, former general within NATO. So he obviously has also this experience. That brings me to the sort of more the Asian angle, so to speak, because since basically the new Czech government took the office, and also now with the new president, the Czech Republic has become very vocal when it comes to Northeast Asia, and especially in terms of supporting Taiwan. Because I think you can't see it now on the computer, but maybe up here, I think the session is called Between War and Peace, Well, I would unfortunately rename it between war and a war. And that means that basically if we are thinking about next conflict within certain period of time, and we can discuss what that time frame is, it will be a conflict over Taiwan. And to some extent, because I actually work much more on Northeast Asia than on Central and Eastern Europe, what we can observe is in Northeast Asia is that Northeast Asia is pretty much looking at the Ukraine and eastern parts of Europe and the whole European situation and is learning. So it's not just China which is looking at what, how the conflict on the ground develops in Ukraine, but also how the West and Central and Eastern Europe reacts in terms of sanctions, in terms of deliveries of tanks, munitions, and so on, but most of all in terms of the unity. So this is definitely one of the things that Northeast Asia is learning, both China, but also Taiwan, but also other countries in that region. Central and Eastern Europe, or let's say Visegrad group, definitely is one of those, let's say, groupings that is very much interesting for Northeast Asia. I can maybe then talk later about different countries in the region. But maybe one more point on specifically China and Visegrad for relations, and what I asked the earlier panel on the Western Balkans, and that's the specific cooperation, especially through what used to be 16+1, 17+1 nights, 15+1, and the format is changing. I would say that at the moment it's in the limbo, if not dead, but of course it can, it can be revived again. But certainly, I think from the side of Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary is a bit questionable. This is how it looks, and maybe we can then go more into details later.
Yeah, we can have a look at the map of the 60+ and one, and I remember a lot of discussion also at the beginning of the pandemic about this kind of formats, and now it's actually completely gone, as you said. It's like there is no discussion about this kind of format. Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very important to stress that this question of Taiwan is very well known in the Czech Republic because of the President Pavel. Maybe in Poland there is not so much attention, but also there is some kind of evolution of the relationship between Hungary and China. So yeah, it's a very interesting subject. So to move to another challenge of the war in Ukraine for the Visegrad Group countries, we can move or go back to the question of disinformation that you have already talked a little bit, and maybe to talk a little bit about the Hungary, because we should be talking about the Hungary in our panel. We have analysts in our team, in the Visegrad team in Institute of Central Europe, Dominic Hay, and he said in one of the podcasts published on our website that I also invite you to consult and to listen to all of the podcasts and our comments. He said that the information on Hungary on the war in Ukraine is in some way limited. For example, he said that photos of the crime in Bucha are obviously, the people can see them on the information on the internet, but there is not so much attention about this kind of crimes in Ukraine, and the Bucha is the most tragic example. They are not shown in the media, are they are shown they gained a lot of attention in the other European countries. And there is also a lot of propaganda in Hungary about the war in Ukraine, and my research on disinformation in the Czech Republic also confirms that there is a lot of Russian influence on the Czech internet, and the influence is currently changing and evolving. For example, the methods used by so-called Russian trolls are more sophisticated now. They try to imitate the Czech well-known and traditional media. So maybe we will go back to the subject that you talk a little bit, so the disinformation on the Slovakia, and you also said you also made some interesting points how the disinformation influenced the current political situation in Slovakia. So if you can comment a little bit also about this, it would be great.
Okay, because this is a big topic, of course, the situation in Slovakia. And we can say Slovak society has been strongly polarized since the beginning of the Russia aggression against Ukraine. In one hand, public opinion polls from the first months of the conflict showed us a significant decrease in Slovak sympathy for Russia and President Vladimir Putin. And the pro-Western orientation in this time also has been strengthened. And for example, importance of NATO as a main guarantor of Slovak security has increased at the beginning. On the other hand, Slovakia failed to reach a consensus on identifying Russia as an aggressor after the outbreak of the war. Why? Despite Slovakia's presence in the EU and NATO for over a dozen years, Slovakia has an ambivalent approach to the West before Russia attack on Ukraine. We have a lot of surveys from this time, especially think tank Globsec in 2020 and 2021, showed that the Slovaks were the most critical society in Central Europe towards NATO and the US. Almost half of the Slovak respondents in this time, before the war, perceived the NATO as aggressive organization and an American tool to control other states in the world, in Europe. Also, 56% Slovaks believe that NATO provoked Russia by building military bases around its borders. Why we had that results before the war? This is a very deep problem because the sympathy towards Russia have a very long traditions in Slovakia. This is related to the pan-Slavism ideology, very popular since 19th century in Slovak society, also in Slovak political elites, also in left-wing, right-wing elites. Of course, they have also the lack of negative historical experiences, like, for example, Poland or Baltic states. We have also in Slovakia some kind of cult of the Red Army. We have a lot of monuments in Slovakia currently, for example, in capital city in Bratislava. It's called Slavín. And also we have a cult of liberation of Slovakia from Nazism. It's a very important in political mythology in Slovakia still. As I said, in many surveys or research, for example, in Globsec trends, the result of this research show us small percentage of Slovak seeing Russia as a threat. Yes, it's not a threat, it's our partner, our strategic partner in this research still. And very important is, like I said in first question and first answer, very active social media and this alternative media in Slovakia, because the intensification of pro-Russia propaganda in social media and the rhetoric of the opposition, like Smer SD, combined with the hard economic situation in Slovakia nowadays, resulted in the growing skepticism of Slovaks toward the West and further support for Ukraine. For example, in March 2022, Slovak Academy of Science published a survey, and in this survey, 34% of respondents agreed with the statement that war in Ukraine was provoked by the West, while Russia only reacted to this provocation. 28% of Slovaks confirmed that Russia's aggression was aimed at disarmed and denazification of Ukraine. 27% believe that Ukraine committed genocide against the Russian-speaking population in the east of the country, while 13% believe Ukrainian side developing a nuclear program. Next survey was very strange. In July 2022, also Slovak Academy of Science and other agencies show new research, and it was a question who should win the war, Russia or Ukraine, and the answer was that 52% of Slovaks said Russia. It was very strange. Of course, it was a problem with methodology of this research, but I don't know. We can see some these pro-Russian tendencies still in Slovak society. And the next survey in September 22 also showed some strange situation, because, for example, 20% of respondents sided with Russia still. 47% choose support for Ukraine, but, for example, 24% of surveyed Slovaks were indifferent to this conflict. So they was unable to give any answer. So this is also, I don't know, it shows social indifference or moral relativism of society. I don't know about this. But also, after this last survey, it was profiling about who was the respondents and who supported pro-Russian tendencies in these researchers. And the respondents who support Russia, it was people with lower education, often less wealthy, people who have a nostalgic for the communist period, so usually older people, supporters of strong authoritarian leadership, and opponents, of course, liberal democracy. Of course, we still have many people who supported conspiracy theories regarding the COVID-19. And many of these people supported also Russia in surveys. Of course, we can say pro-Russian attitudes were also related to the economic and energy crisis in Slovakia. Many respondents did not ideologically support Russia, but rather wanted a faster end of the war and improvement in their personal economic situation. So, okay, we can add still this problem with this social media, with this alternative media. They are still active, they support this propaganda, and the government don't have a good solution how to finish this. So this is, I think, the biggest problem nowadays.
It's very interesting because also in Czech Republic there was a discussion to introduce a law against disinformation. And finally, the project is stopped. I think that there was some kind of protest, mostly from the far right parts of the Czech political state. That it's not a law against disinformation. Is the law who would help to control the free speech. So yeah, if you have any comments on this disinformation situation in Visegrad group, please comment. And if not, I would also ask you to talk a little bit more about the foreign policy of the V4 countries, not only in terms of Asia, but also in the border sense. So if you have some comments, I'm sure you have, please share them with us.
Yes. So maybe I'll start with disinformation, or maybe actually I could start with your first question, which was about Hungary.
Yeah.
What I find quite interesting nowadays, there is a discussion in the European Parliament and also among remaining EU member states that Hungary may actually be suspended from holding its EU presidency, which is coming up not now in July, but in January next year. So that would be quite a strong signal if this happens. There are certain ways in which it could be done, but it seems like that Europe, especially the European Parliament, is pretty much set on doing that. So let's see. On the disinformation, I'm not an expert on this, but what I find interesting, what's problematic in the Czech Republic is that part of the mainstream media is basically owned by Mr. Babiš, who used to be he is a former prime minister. Then he ran against Petr Pavel for president. He has now sort of withdrawn a little bit from the political scene. So I think he is just probably thinking what's his next move. Also because obviously he is still enmeshed in a scandal for corruption or defrauding European funds, so obviously he needs an immunity. But this is also one of the problems in the Czech Republic, that it's not just the disinformation as Łukasz described in terms of social media and sort of the pro-Russian channels, but also one of the mainstream newspapers are basically owned by Mr. Babiš, who has been using soft pro-Russia rhetoric. For instance, during the presidential campaign, one of his main arguments why people should not vote for General Pavel was that Mr. Pavel is a general and therefore he will mobilize the Czechs and we will have to go to fight in the war in the Ukraine, which obviously is total nonsense, but it was quite spread through different channels. I think you also mentioned before the point about rhetoric that the NATO sort of because it was getting closer to Russia, it caused the war in Ukraine. What I find interesting, this argument is actually quite popular. It's been used not just in the Czech Republic, but also in Germany, where I live, and especially within one section of the left-wing parts of the elites, including intelligentsia, which I find quite disturbing that this sort of Russian propaganda is pretty much accepted as one of the legitimate arguments also in Germany. Among some of my colleagues, I must add. Maybe finally to your question about V4 and foreign policy, maybe I start from a different angle and I say that at the moment I think V4 is also not existent. So, you know, it was very nice yesterday to be at this ceremony about cooperation within the Lublin Triangle. So I hope the Lublin Triangle will be much more successful in this regard than before is at the moment. And in a way, you know, I was thinking about parallels that, I mean, you mentioned about Belarus, which is outside, but could become sort of the fourth member of the Lublin Triangle. In a way, before has now the opposite problem. We have Hungary inside, and we would sort of like to, you know, figure out what to do about it and possibly somehow push it outside. But of course, it's not easy. And also in terms of, you know, future developments, hoping that, you know, the situation domestically in Hungary changes at some point may not be the best strategy. But in a way, you see some parallels in that. And in terms of the foreign policy, yeah, Hungary is kind of the black sheep. So let's hope that Slovakia is not going to join the Hungarian camp after the elections. But yeah, maybe I'll stop here.
Yeah, this is a very interesting problem that we talk about the V4 countries, but not about the V4 group, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the Hungary has left the building, so there is not much space to discuss. So yeah, it's thank you for your insights. And as our panel is the last one, I would like to ask you some more general problem, maybe the philosophical one, about this idea of Central Europe. Because as we are speaking about the Hungary and that they are not, they have some kind of special policy towards war in Ukraine, which is different from the Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia. And already in 2014, because of the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the discussion about the Central Europe understood as this kind of idea, a certain idea made come back mostly to the newspapers, journals, and also books, literature. And also well-known writers, Yuri Andrikhovich and Andrzej Stasiuk, made a comment that maybe this is beginning of the threat that Iron Curtain could refall. And to sum up our panel, and maybe, as I said, our conference, I would like to ask you, what do you think about this idea of Central Europe understood in this traditional way as Kundera, Milosz, Czesław Milosz, or Jerzy Kłoczowski, who worked in this building and was the founder of our institute? They were thinking about this certain idea of Central Europe. So my question is, what do you think about this idea in the current political scene? Should it evolve to more idea of East Central Europe, or should it develop in some kind of other direction? Can you share with us our thoughts about the Central Europe idea? Does it exist still, or because of the Hungary, because of the war in Ukraine, there is some kind of evolve and change?
Such a heavy question before lunch.
I have wonderful speakers, so
that's why we follow lunch.
Yeah, maybe I could say that in the same year when Andrikhovich and Stasiuk made this text, there were also interview with Timothy Snyder, who said that he is not afraid of the refall of Iron Curtain. Rather, he is afraid about the Russia self-isolation. So maybe this could inspire you a little bit too. Maybe Łukasz, you can start.
Okay, but maybe my answer, it's not philosophical answer, because, for example, I understand Central Europe in the context of the war, for example, as a 3Cs initiative countries. Because we have 12 countries inside the European Union. Of course, we have Ukraine, who collaborate with 3Cs initiative, and we can emphasize that most of these countries in Central Europe clearly support Ukraine in many levels. For example, Poland, Baltic states, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and of course, Balkan states. Of course, we have some other example of this attitude to Ukraine war, because we have, for example, Austria is also a member of 3Cs initiative, and Austria has a specific position on this conflict. The Austrian government emphasizes the neutral status of this country, and this explains the lack of arms supplies to Ukraine, for example. But of course, Austria provides political and humanitarian support to the Ukrainian side. And we have an example of Hungarian policy. And Hungarian reaction to the Russian aggression against Ukraine was the most controversial in Central Europe, in 3Cs initiative member states. The Hungarian government supports EU sanctions against Russia, but on the other hand, they don't want to support Ukraine with arms supplies. They don't want to transit of arms through its territory of Hungary. Of course, they have a very specific energy policy also. The second part of my answer is about new energy architecture in Central Europe after February 2022. Because until the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the 3Cs initiative countries or Central Europe countries were largely dependent on supplies of energy resources from Russia. And nowadays we have a totally different situation because major of the states reduced the supply of energy from Russia very quick, very fast. It was possible because we had a good energy infrastructure nowadays. For example, in 2022, gas pipelines connecting Poland and Lithuania was opened. Also Poland and Slovakia and Baltic pipe, and for example, pipeline Greece and Bulgaria. But on the other hand, we have also example of Hungary. It's a still very important partner to Russia in Central Europe. Of course, they try to change something because at the beginning of this year, they conducting intensive talks with the Middle East countries like Qatar or Oman, and also in January 2023 they signed agreement with Azerbaijan on cooperation about transit of natural gas.
So if I understand correctly, you think about this idea of Central Europe in a practical way, that it's a certain construct that should develop according to the political situation.
Yes, so support to Ukraine, new energy architecture, but of course we can say Ukraine is a part of Central Europe. I think Ukraine politicians said about this. And for example, 2022, in my opinion, there was a geopolitical shift to the east. For example, in June 2022, Ukraine and Moldova received EU candidate status. So this is a part of EU policy. And during the summit of 3Cs initiative in Riga, and also in June 2022, Ukraine was granted the status of participating partner. So in my opinion, we can define Central Europe more broadly, not only European Union states, but also this former Soviet Union states aspiring to join to European Union and NATO. So maybe this is my definition. Like you said, more practical. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Do you comment?
Yes, maybe since you've given me some time to think, thank you. Well, I must say I'm probably not such a big fan of defining Central Europe or Visegrad Group. And in a way, you know, going in your direction, I think looking at things practically make most sense, but also, you know, in terms of thinking fluidity of groupings. And in a way, we don't necessarily have to think, you know, Central Europe vis-a-vis the Western Europe, so to speak, right? So on certain issues, Czech Republic has, for instance, quite good understandings with Netherlands, especially on economic issues. On energy, we can, you know, work quite closely with Spain, which is, you know, very good in terms of you know, using other sources of energy than just dependence on Russia. So in a way, we shouldn't probably think about Central European region, but more about European region and how within, you know, within the EU, but also, you know, broader Europe, where we can see different coalitions on different issues. And I think yesterday someone, I think one of the Ukrainian colleagues mentioned that in a way regionalism is based on values, and I think this is something I quite appreciate. And in a way, if we look at it through this perspective, we don't have to think just about Europe as such, but going back to my expertise, which is more about Northeast Asia or Asia in general, then we see suddenly, due to the Russian aggression, much more cooperation between Europe, US obviously as well, but also different countries in Northeast Asia, such as Japan and South Korea, which previously, you know, were interesting for us in terms of trade and tourism, but not really in terms of security or, you know, shared values. And we will have the NATO summit in Vilnius, and it looks like that definitely both Japanese Prime Minister and South Korean President will join. So in a way, we suddenly see these different setups also throughout the world. And maybe one more word on this. What I think what we can bring to the table in terms of Indo-Pacific is our experience of, you know, discerning where there is disinformation, where there is a danger. And in a way, as much as the Western Europe didn't listen to us too much in terms of Russian problem, they are also not listening to us in terms of the Chinese problem. And I think this is one thing which we could sort of collaboratively work a little bit more and try to, you know, convince maybe my German colleagues that, you know, the German approach now is, well, we have war with Russia, we can't afford another conflict with China. But that's exactly the wrong way to go. So maybe this is where we could contribute a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting point. I was thinking about some kind of sum up, but you done it so well that I think we can finish our discussion here, and I will give the floor to Tomasz.
So time is speeding fast. So ladies and gentlemen, it's time to finish our Lublin Central Europe Forum 2023. And yesterday and today we had rich discussions about the Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Balkans and Visegrad countries. And on behalf of the Institute of Central Europe, I would like to warmly thank you for the participating, I mean for our panels, and also thank you to our participating institutions from Central Europe, from Eastern Europe and from the Balkans. So thank you very much and see you next time, next year in Lublin. So goodbye.